Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel wherever you are, and so much love to each and every one of you. I hope you're doing very, very well. I'm doing fabulous, thank you very much. It's roaring outside, it's a terrible wind, very bad weather where I am, and so I hope that your weather is treating you fine and that you're not caught up in a disaster like in North Carolina with all those terrible winds. So before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell and the thumbs up. And this is a very exciting story. We're on part 2 of it, so let's find out where it takes us. So let's get started, shall we? I'm a religious man, Lisa, which might rather surprise you, for many in my profession are not. Just so you know, my father was and still is a pastor, so his influences over my life have been very profound. I've heard stories about demonic attacks before, so stories like this aren't completely alien to me, as they would be to the average man on the street, so to speak. Let's just say my father told me some things over the years when I was growing up that would make your hair curl. So I am the kind of psychologist that has an open mind about things that we cannot always explain. I do happen to believe that voodoo can be extremely dangerous. It can certainly open up doors to the demonic realm. I know that we are fighting an invisible war against good and evil, whether we know it or not. Everything, Lisa, in my opinion, has its intrinsic opposite. That's the way the universe works.
You're absolutely right, Dr. Bernstone. It is a war against good and evil. Even before my mother died, she had a visitation in her nightmare, a lucid nightmare at that, from this grotesquely hideous winged creature with the treacherously evil red eyes that other members of my extended family saw shortly before they died. She was absolutely terrified, as you can imagine. She was concerned that our immediate family was now in grave danger from the curse that Anna had inflicted on us all. It was really like a debilitating cancer, that's the only way I can describe it, that seemed to be consuming my whole family and eating us up alive. My mother knew we had to do something to put an end to the curse.
So what did she do, Lisa?
Well, that's a good question. One morning, my mother arrived at Anna's house very early, ready to confront her friend about her grievances. And lo and behold, there were ambulance and police vehicles parked outside Anna's house. My mother knew something quite dreadful must have happened. My mother observed Anna's husband Victor, who was not Haitian, but had been married to Anna for over 5 years. The poor man appeared to be standing outside of his house, looking rather bemused. He was talking to a police officer. My mother said all the colour had drained away from his face. She said when she saw that hopelessly lost and confused look, she knew at once that Anna had to be dead. All the poor man could say was he didn't understand why this had happened. Victor then went on to tell my mother that during the night Anna had hung herself in the closet and written "I'm sorry" in lipstick on the bathroom mirror. I can't imagine what that must have been like for the poor man. He then went on to tell my mother that days before Anna had died, that she'd been behaving very strangely and out of character. He told my mother that her eyes would go very black, the colour of coal, he said, and she'd speak to him in a deep gravelly voice that wasn't her own, and that freaked him the hell out. He told my mother it was like she was possessed by something. Worse still, Victor's discovered a shrine in the house, hidden away in one of the closets, dedicated to voodoo, and it freaked him the hell out. He soon moved away from that place, because he was hearing strange thumping sounds at night, voices and screams and stuff like that, and it scared the hell out of him, so he sold the place and moved away. Do you know what I think, Dr. Bernstone?
I suspect you're going to tell me. What do you think, Lisa?
I think it was like the evil that Anna conjured up to attack my family had turned on her as well. But that's what happens when you play with fire. You get burnt, don't you, Dr. Bernstone?
You sure do, Dr. Bernstone agreed. That's what my father always said about evil. He would claim it rebounds on the sender, so to speak. Don't let me stop you with your story. Please carry on, Lisa.
Well, my mother was naturally affrighted, that Anna had killed herself like this, even though they'd fallen out over the jewellery business. She said Anna would never have done that, killed herself, I mean. It was completely out of character for her. She valued her life enormously and looked forward to having children of her own with Victor, so her death was very curious indeed. Later that day my mother called a Catholic priest over to our house. His name was Father Morgan Marshall. We were incredibly lucky because he came to our house at once. Often Catholic priests are very reluctant to come around to your house randomly to bless the place, but everyone knew Morgan Marshall was the kindest person you could ever hope to meet. He was like Dr. McGregor, a man of substance. He'd drop everything for a parishioner in trouble. That's what he was like, Dr. Bernstone, a remarkable man. I think he could tell by hearing the distraught tone in my mother's voice that she desperately needed his help, and that she was disquieted about something. So he promptly arrived at our house, armed with the whole shebang of holy water and incense. My mother told him that she wanted him to bless our family and the house as well. She believed we'd been threatened by a great evil. She didn't go into detail about what was going on with our family, or about the curse that Anna had inflicted on us. I guess all she wanted was to get the house blessed as quickly as she could, and the questions could come later. Let me tell you, Dr. Bernstone, Father Morgan Marshall hadn't been told a single thing about what was going on with our family, but he was remarkably intuitive and spiritually very alert, because he sensed the heavy oppression hanging around our home, and he believed it had been deliberately conjured up by someone with evil intent. He actually told my mother that he thought someone had placed a curse on our family. He could feel it quite tangibly. How could he have possibly known that, Dr. Bernstone? No one had told him a single thing. He told my mother that he could sense a powerful demonic entity in our home. Dr. Bernstone leaned forward in his chair. His eyes had grown wider by the second. They were steadily fixed upon me. I couldn't believe that my own psychologist was hanging on to my every single word. He was so interested in what I was telling him. I had his undivided attention. I was naturally stunned and amazed that he actually believed my story. I had not even gone to the police about this matter, lest they thought I was as nutty as a fruitcake. They would have told me that all the family deaths had been accidental, but I knew differently. Dr. Bernstone appeared to be taking me very seriously. He didn't seem to doubt the curse inflicted on my family was very real. It felt so good to be sharing all my tumultuous inner turmoil with him, along with the fear that at some point this winged creature might make an appearance in my own nightmares, as I had this very real feeling I might actually be living on borrowed time. But this was not a thought I wanted to share with Dr. Bernstone. Not yet, anyway. I had reconciled myself to the fact that if this demon had wanted me dead, I'd have been sent off to my Maker a long time ago. Besides, my life was already a living hell, as I was navigating my way through so much grief. Maybe the winged creature felt my current suffering was vengeance for me enough, and being dead wouldn't hurt nearly as much as being alive did.
So once Father Morgan Marshall realized a curse had been inflicted upon your family, what did he do about it?
Dr. Bernstone asked me, raising a quizzical brow. Well, he blessed the house and our family, of course. You know the prayer with the Archangel Michael. The house felt a great deal lighter after he left, and our spirits were lifted. But nothing untoward happened during those blessings, which in itself was rather strange, because you would have thought that Father Morgan Marshall would have cornered the demon. There was no demonic growling or anything like that, which my mother expected would happen, but it never did.
What about your father? How did he feel about all this? You claim he was a perennial cynic. How did he take all the blessings being prayed all over your house? I'm sure all of this must have gone down with him like a lead balloon.
You're absolutely right, Dr. Bernstone. My father thought my mother was being absolutely ridiculous to even suggest that her Haitian friend Anna had put a curse on us. He thought she was being far too overdramatic, especially calling around a Catholic priest to pray over the house. But he humoured her. He thought she was in a fragile state of mind, after having recently lost her parents and her 2 siblings, So I think he decided it would be wiser to say nothing on the matter at all. So he kept stum.
But surely your father found it profoundly odd that several of your extended family members had died over a 2-week period in car accidents. I'm sure these happenings would test the most pragmatic among us. There is your mother's Haitian friend, having been found dead after hanging herself in the closet. Surely your father could see something untoward was going on there. Had it been me, even if I was a doubting Thomas like your father so clearly was, I have to confess such strange outlandish things happening around me would certainly make me sit up and take notice. It would challenge the paradigm I had of the world, for very sure.
My father wasn't a religious man, Dr. Bernstone. On the contrary, my mother was the religious one. She was Catholic. She was always praying with her rosary beads. My father believed when you died, and that was that. And that you didn't have any spiritual accountability for anything, because you just returned to the dust of the earth. He didn't believe in a God or in an afterlife of any kind. He said what happened to the grandparents and our 2 aunts and uncles was an unfortunate fluke of nature. There was nothing more to it. He said the nightmares of the winged creature meant absolutely nothing. When it came to my mother's Haitian friend Anna, he told my mother he'd never liked Anna, never been comfortable with her being around. He wasn't surprised she had screwed my mother by stealing from the jewellery business, for he didn't trust her in the first place. He told my mother she had mean, hard, cruel, calculating eyes, but he also thought she was weird. So he says he wasn't surprised she took her own life. I hasten to say he was the one that warned my mother never to get involved with Anna. I guess he just never liked her.
So your father was very indifferent to all these strange happenings. If it had been me, I would have sensed something insidious was going on.
My father was a practical man, Dr. Bernstone. He wore his heart on his sleeve. What you saw with him was what you got. It was the only disagreement my parents ever had in their marriage. The religious factor, I mean. My father unequivocally did not believe in the spiritual realm, while my mother was always praying for the deliverance of his soul. I paused for a brief moment, and then said, "Do you know what really troubled me, Dr. Bernstone? It was after Father Morgan Marshall left our house on the day he'd blessed the place that my mother suddenly realized, shortly after his visit, that during the blessing the father had sprinkled holy water over every room in the house and said his prayers except her bedroom and bathroom. You see, Dr. Bernstone, she had put Pringle, her cat, in the bedroom to put her out of the way for a while. Pringle would follow my mother around wherever she went. My mother didn't want the cat getting under their feet while the pastor blessed the house. She told the father that they should bless the bedroom and bathroom ensuite later, at the end of all the other blessings. I guess she and the father overlooked that they had forgotten to bless the bedroom and bathroom with holy water, and that was where the gas leak occurred that wiped out my entire family. I suspect had he blessed that room, Father Morgan Marshall may have in fact cornered the demon."
"That is frightful to think the priest did not bless your parents' bedroom. You're right. That is where the demon must have been hiding out."
"That's exactly what I think, Dr. Bernstone. I believe the demon remained in my parents' bedroom. And then look at how my family was wiped out soon after the blessing. So there you have it. I have no one, Dr. Bernstone, no one in the entire world. Worse still, even my best friend Philippa has completely deserted me. We were close for years, since I was a little girl, and now she's completely abandoned me. She doesn't know how to comfort me in my grief, but that's not the reason she doesn't want anything to do with me now. When I told her the story, I think that she was beginning to believe that the nefarious effects of the curse inflicted on my family would ultimately rub off on her. It was almost as if I had a deadly contagious disease that might be dangerously infectious, that by association she might actually catch. I haven't heard from her since. She refuses to take any of my calls, which has made me feel all the more alone."
"I can't imagine what that must be like for you, Lisa,"
said Dr. Bernstone sympathetically, in such a sincerely kind voice.
"Philippa sounds rather like a fair-weather friend, if you ask me. So you're better off without her in your life. A real friend won't desert you when a storm hits. You have my deepest sympathy, you really do in that regard. But can you tell me what happened on the day you lost your family, Lisa? It might help enormously to talk about it. I know you probably don't want to, and you don't want to go there. But I think you might find going over the inauspicious events that happened over that weekend, and sharing them with a listening ear, it might bring you some much-needed relief, and some closure, so to speak.
But what is there to talk about, Dr. Bernstone? I said, shrugging my shoulders. My family all died, didn't they? I should have died myself, but I wasn't there. I was sleeping in the outside cottage on our property, which I happened to rent from my parents. Well, I rented it from them when they were alive. I'm the only one that survived. Sometimes I seriously wish I hadn't. Now my family's gone. Grandparents, aunts and uncles, my mum and dad, my siblings. What have I got left to live for? Absolutely nothing. Do you know what it's like, Dr. Bernstone, to wake up every morning to see your life as a series of grey, murky days, one after the other, that never ever get any brighter? It's pitiful, that's what it is. There is no colour in my life any more. It really is like I've died. When my family died, I miss them all so desperately much. There isn't a day that doesn't go by that they're not prominently featured in my thoughts. I feel so vacuously empty all the time, as if my life has got no meaning left. It's like I'm just still existing, like the only flower left in a garden, once the whole place has been demolished, and I'm the only flower that got left behind, that will probably very soon be uprooted, because I no longer belong anywhere.
You think you've got nothing left to live for, Lisa? Why do you think that?
Because I've lost everything, Dr. Bernstone. Absolutely everything. Why do you think?
Why don't you tell me what happened to your family, Lisa, over that weekend? I know they died from carbon monoxide poisoning, but it might help enormously to talk about everything that occurred that day. Sometimes, instead of running away from the storm, the best thing to do is run straight to it, to the eye of the storm, and face it head on. And that is where the healing will begin.
I was rather surprised to find that I did actually want to talk about what had happened on the day my family died. It had been so good to share my feelings with Dr. Bernstone about the curse that I believed had been deliberately placed on my family's bloodline, that I was sure would come after me at some point. I had not to date had any visitations from the winged creature in my nightmares, but I wasn't holding my breath any time soon. It was like there was a big part of me that knew that one of these days that monster that was responsible for wiping my family out would soon be coming after me. How I knew this, I'm not entirely sure, but it was an unquenchable gut feeling that refused to shift, and in a strange way, I was almost resigned to my plight, rather like someone who's been given a cancer diagnosis, with only a few months left to live.
Let's start at the very beginning, shall we, Lisa? How about you tell me when the last time it was that you saw your family alive?
Dr. Bernstone inquired. Well, the last time I saw my parents and my 2 siblings alive was at about 5 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon. It was midsummer. The weather had been great. We were all trying to come to terms with our grievous losses after the recent passing of the people we love. It wasn't easy, but we faced each day at a time, as you do, as optimistically as we could, although I think my mother did believe that there was a death sentence hanging over all of our heads. I know she rued the day she ever went into the jewellery business with Anna. That afternoon I was leaving for my waitressing shift at the all-night diner where I worked. People used to rock up there to eat a huge meal at 1 o'clock in the morning. Can you believe that, Dr. Bernstone? Personally, I could never understand how people could eat so much so late at night and then return home to sleep on a full stomach. By all accounts, the diner was always doing a booming trade. Business was great. We were practically run off our feet, working those late hours, especially over the weekends, serving hamburgers, chips, T-bone steaks, spare ribs, you name it, to our hungry diners. I would get phenomenal tips from people, that after a couple of drinks would become insanely generous. I would return home from my shift at the diner, feeling absolutely shattered, but at least I was richer. I worked as a waitress, you see, to pay for my beauty therapy course. Ever since I was a girl, it's all I wanted to do, was to run my own beauty salon. I didn't want my parents to pay for my course. They wanted to, of course, but I wouldn't hear of it. They'd helped me so much already over the years, and I just didn't want to take advantage of all their kindness. Also, I think I wanted some independence so that I could prove to myself that I could do things on my own, without parental assistance. I tried to qualify as a therapist during the day. That's where I'd spend my time on my course in town, run by a couple of professional teachers. We had to study everything from anatomy to physiology and everything else besides. In the evening I would waitress at the diner, alternating shifts with my friends. I was determined to pay my way, you see. My father had said once I qualified as a beauty therapist, he'd help me start up my own business, like he'd helped my mother start up her jewellery business, that ended up being a dreadful flop because of her deceitful Haitian friend. After my family's death, well, I lost all that enthusiasm in that regard. I don't have any passion these days, left or reserved for running my own business.
So you saw all your family at 5 o'clock that afternoon in the summer? That was the last time you saw them alive. Is that right?
That's right. It was a weekend, you see. We spent most of the day lackadaisically lying by the pool, enjoying a lovely family barbecue. My father was resolutely determined for us to enjoy life to the fullest, despite all the insufferable grief we had been through. I remember he cooked burgers and steaks. It was very enjoyable. I kissed my parents goodbye as you do, very nonchalantly, never appreciating for a second that that would be the last time I ever saw them alive. Thinking about that moment gives me the chills now. I remember my father saying to me that he hated me doing a waitressing job, and he wished to God I'd let him pay for my beauty therapy course, so that I wouldn't have to waitress for those god-awful hours. He didn't think it was healthy for me to work so late at night, but I reminded him that all over America there are people working the night shift, just to put food on the table for their families. My mother wholeheartedly agreed with me on this. She said it was great that I wanted to be independent and to pay my way, and she thought my father should encourage me on this. My sister was saying I was stark raving mad not to let our dad pay for my course. She couldn't think of anything worse than waitressing during those late insufferable hours. When I left the house in my second-hand car, my father told me to take care. Those were the very last words he ever spoke to me. If I'd known that, I said, a tear trickling down my cheeks, I would have told my family how much I loved them. But I didn't have a chance to do that.
Of course you would have told them that. You would have told them you loved them, of course you would, said Dr. Bernstone. But I'm sure they knew you loved them already. Sometimes you don't have to tell people things like that. Your loved ones already know. Even if you had an altercation with your parents on the last day of their lives, it wouldn't have mattered a jot. They'd have known you loved them all the same. Of that I'm most sure. So after you said goodbye to them, what happened next?
Well, the evening was pretty routine, wasn't it? I went to my waitressing job as I always did. I remember thinking to myself my sister was absolutely right. It would have been so much easier not to have waitressed that evening. But I knew the extra work was good for the soul. That evening I'd have done almost anything to stay with the family for the rest of the afternoon and evening. But if I'd done so, I wouldn't be here now. And that really is a sobering thought.
You really believe that you would have been killed in that carbon monoxide poisoning?
Absolutely. I would have definitely been there. My family were watching a movie in my parents' bed, you see. My parents had this amazingly comfortable huge bed. I've never seen anything like it before. You had to have the sheets and the eiderdown and everything personally made for that bed. It was so large. It literally overtook their small bedroom. It was a family tradition of ours, since we were all small, to gather together in my parents' bedroom and cosy up in that gorgeous bed together to watch television. It was so snug and cosy. We'd cuddle up together in our PJs with bowls of popcorn, ice cream and plenty of soda, and watch something very good together on television. And during this dark time, we needed each other's close companionship all the more, so it was the most obvious thing for us to do. And even when I went off on my waitressing shift, I was aware I was going to miss out on a movie in bed with the rest of the family. And that was why it was so disappointing to have to go. But going to my waitressing job actually saved my life, Dr. Bernstone. What would happen for us? Once the movie was over, we would leave our parents' bedroom, my siblings, I mean. They would return to their respective bedrooms. I would kiss my parents goodnight. In my case, I would return to the outside cottage in the backyard. I valued my independence, you see, but at the same time I loved to be close to the family. I paid my father a very small rent to stay in that cottage. It was upon my own insistence. My father did not like me paying any rent at all. He was dead set against that, as he was for my paying for my own beauty therapy courses. But I believed it was the right thing for me to do. Unfortunately, they could have rented that cottage out for a hefty sum of money, if they'd wanted to, so I was paying my father very little. My parents had a boiler in their bathroom ensuite of their bedroom, which was in the house when they bought it. My father had been meaning to replace it. It was getting old. It had been causing a few problems of late and occasionally making funny noises. I wish to God my father had got the damned thing serviced. But I don't believe this tragedy could have been avoided, because there was more to the tragedy than meets the eye. Unbeknown to them, the boiler was leaking out carbon monoxide poisoning into the air. And with the bedroom doors shut, I guess they just didn't stand a chance. The deaths were of course described by the medical examiner as a tragic accident, but I don't believe that for a second. Their deaths were a consequence of that voodoo curse. I know that to be true.
So what exactly happened when you returned home from your waitressing job?
Well, it was about 10 to 3 in the morning when I got home. I was surprised that my parents' bedroom light was still on, as was the kitchen light, but I thought they were probably still up and about, as it was still the weekend. I'm such an idiot, I really am. I should have checked up on them, especially given my mother was in a nervous state, because of the nightmare she'd had of the winged creature. I remember that weekend she went on and on about how she wanted to call Father Morgan Marshall around to bless the bedroom and bathroom ensuite, as that had been overlooked during the blessing. But unfortunately he was in Ireland, and would only be back home in 3 weeks' time. He was Irish, you see, and had gone abroad to see family. The timing couldn't have been worse. My mother couldn't find anyone else available, willing to bless the house, as there's so much red tape when it comes to the Catholic Church, you see. I should have known something was up. My mother's cat Pringle followed my mother around like a dog everywhere she went. She always sleeps with my mother, and that night she came to sleep with me in the outside cottage, which was so unlike her. Maybe she found my mother dead, or maybe she could pick up on the carbon monoxide poisoning and fled the small opening in the bathroom window, which invariably would have saved her life. It was incredible because Pringle joined me in bed, and the moment my head hit the pillow, I was out like a light. But that Sunday morning when I woke up, I knew something was wrong. I just knew it, with every fibre of my being.
How so?
That's the thing. I don't really know, Dr. Bernstone. For a start, I had this unsettling gnawing feeling in my gut. It felt rather like indigestion. I felt nauseous as well. I woke up swaddled with this feeling of impending doom. I've never felt anything like that before or since, but it shook me to the core like the beads in a baby's rattle. For a start, I think I was rather surprised to wake up that morning, only to discover that Pringles was still lying in my arms with her paws outstretched. That cat adored my mother, so I couldn't understand why she was still hanging around me. Pringles' atypical behaviour gave me a pause for thought. I really thought she would have abandoned me long ago to seek my mother out. My mother used to suffer from asthma really badly. She'd react allergically to animals, which was a huge bummer growing up, as we all wanted cats and dogs in our family. We were huge animal lovers. We knew we could never own them due to my mother's unfortunate condition. She'd cough, wheeze, and sometimes even struggle to breathe with dogs and cats around. One day she found Pringles lying on our doorstep half dead. I'm not sure if Pringles came to our door for help. She was dying on our doorstep, but Mum was sure that that was the case. It looked like poor Pringles had been badly mauled by a dog. She was bleeding out badly. There were bite marks around her neck. My mother rushed Pringles to the local vet, believing that she wouldn't make it, but Pringles miraculously recovered against the odds. The vet said he'd never met such a fighter. We kept Pringles for ourselves because we couldn't locate her previous owner, even though we put posters up and about everywhere in our neighbourhood and notified the local animal shelter to ask if anyone was missing a cat, but nobody ever came forward. I'm in no doubt that Pringles saw my mother as a hero, and probably as her newly adopted parent. I guess she knew my mother had saved her life, so she adopted my mother as her new best friend, following her around devotedly everywhere she went. My mother naturally fell madly in love with Pringles. She was besotted over the cat. The strange thing is my mother never reacted allergically to Pringles, and I don't exactly know why. It seemed like she developed an immunity to the cat, for some absurd reason, which was really strange.
Well, it's a possibility, said Dr. Bernstone. I have heard of that happening before. People who are allergic to other people's pets, but not to their own. Maybe they develop a tolerance for the things that they are exposed to on a daily basis. I began to fiddle rather awkwardly with my fingers as I thought about what I was going to say next. It was the most horrific part of my story, so my heart began to beat violently fast in my chest, as the memories of that morning, when I discovered my family all lying dead in the huge bed, rudely galloped back into my recall.
Go on, said Dr. Bernstone encouragingly.
Take your time, Lisa. You're doing extremely well. I'm proud of you.
Well, that morning I got up late, due to the waitressing job, of course, that I'd done the previous evening. It must have been about 11 p.m. when I got up, so it was veering towards lunchtime. It was common for me to sleep in on a weekend after a late shift at the diner. So I casually strolled to the kitchen in the cottage barefoot with Pringle following behind me. I made a quick cup of hot coffee in order to calm down my nerves and to get rid of that clawing nausea that had developed at the back of my throat that refused to abate. I quickly opened up a can of tuna that I found in the cupboard for Pringle. She gladly gobbled it up. She seemed unusually hungry, which was decidedly odd, as I thought my mother would have dutifully fed her the previous night. She always spoiled Pringle, poaching her chicken and salmon. Sometimes she fed Pringle better than us. We teased her a whole lot about it, telling her she loved Pringles more than the rest of us.
Well, no wonder that cat liked your mother so much, Mr. Bernstone teased. It sounds like your mother pampered her a whole lot. You say you were nervous on that morning, and you felt it was a palpable feeling.
Yes, I was. You see, Dr. Bernstone, I sensed something didn't feel right that morning. I had decided to take Pringles back to my mother, in case my mother was worried about the whereabouts of her cat. Pringles hung around my mother all the time. She wasn't like other cats, you see. She behaved more like a dog. I let myself in the house with the key in the kitchen door, which was under the mat. This was the first surprise that I was greeted to that morning. The door would normally be open at that late time, so I'd never had to let myself in the house before. This was a first.
That must have made you feel exceedingly uneasy, finding the house all locked up like that. It would have certainly given me pause for thought.
You took the words right out of my mouth, Dr. Bernstone. I did feel incredibly uneasy. I can't remember a single time in my life, since I've lived in that family home of ours, that I've ever had to stoop to look under the mat outside the front door of the kitchen to look for the key to open that door. I've never had to do that before. So the feeling I got in entering the house was odiously menacing, to say the least. And the worst thing of all was you could have heard a pin drop. It was that silent inside the house. And there was a suffocating oppression in that silence that is very hard to explain to you. The lightness in the house that we'd previously enjoyed after Pastor Morgan Marshall had prayed over the place had all but gone. The early morning sunshine failed to twinkle in the kitchen in its normal manner like it did every single morning. The open-plan kitchen appeared to be inexplicably dark, unwelcoming and even hostile. I was hit with this gnawing feeling that I was being watched by something or someone that I couldn't physically see with the naked eye. Pringles began to stare in the far corner of the kitchen, her fur standing up on edge. She was hissing and thumping her tail. She bolted straight out of the half-open kitchen window and was out like a shot. I've never seen Pringle behave like that before. So her paradoxical reaction to what was in the far corner of the kitchen made me feel that my sense of being watched by something was not unfounded. Pringles had at the very least confirmed my fears that something was definitely there in the kitchen. I'm telling you, Dr. Bernstone, I didn't imagine this. So there we are. That is the end of part 2 of our story. Part 3 is tomorrow night. I look forward to you joining me then. Until next time, goodbye and good night.